Part 3 Chapter 11. A Phoenix Must Burn Before It Rises. Since telling his mom about the South Side, a weight had been lifted from his shoulders even if Auntie Mitsuchan read him the riot act when they told the Bakugos. With him being at the South Side out in the open, he asked his mom about alternate over-the-counter medications or basic treatment when he noticed his students were a little sick. He would have suggested they go to the hospital if it was bad, but understood some of them couldn't afford to take the time off work or money to go to the hospital. He's refused payment for his tutoring before if he knew the person was really struggling. He simply didn't need the money as much as they did, and he hadn't started working because he needed money. Near the end of the third month, he was trying to think of whether to get more blankets for the community center or coats since it was January and a snowstorm warning was in the forecast as he rode to the South Side. He was going over the pros and cons when he got an alert from his phone. He had set up his phone to give him alerts if there was a situation going on near or in the South Side. If there was an earthquake or something he wanted to know that before he walked into it. He took out his phone and checked what the message was about. His jaw dropped and Izuku felt pale as he reread the alert, desperately praying in his head it wasn't true, his horror growing with every word. According to a hero fan site, the number 2 pro hero Endeavor had been spotted by the South Side pursuing a bank robber with a speed quirk. This alone wouldn't terrify him, but most people weren't the rabidly obsessed hero fanboy he is. Izuku felt every statistic for the hero be dragged through his mind. Endeavor was single-handedly responsible for the highest property damage rates in all of Japan, the 34.6% civilian casualty rate that had been consistent for Endeavor's entire career since he left UA. The 67.3% of civilians that never recover from the injuries caused by Endeavor on average. Knowing all of this and the majority of the South Side was made up of outdated buildings left Izuku a completely panicked mess. The train had never felt slower as over a million horrible things that could be happening cycled through his mind. When the train finally reached his stop, Izuku rushed out as fast as he could. He could see the fire raging over 3 blocks away once he was out of the station and his heart dropped almost immediately. He saw the full horror of it all when he was inside the district and took his phone out to call 119 when he didn't see any officials trying to control the inferno. Emergency services, what's your emergency? A woman calmly asked. It took Izuku a few tries to get his tongue to work correctly. Endeavor was fighting a villain nearby and now there's a big F fire. UN need to send someone please. He explained, stuttering worse than he had for a while as chaos went on around him. Alright sir, please try to stay calm. Can you tell me where you are so I can send help? She questioned. Niigata Prefecture, I'm at Block 48 of the South Side District. Izuku rattled off trying to calm himself down, but it was hard. There was a moment of silence for a bit before the woman spoke again. Sir, this is an emergency line, and we don't have time for prank calls. The South Side District has been abandoned for years now, much less the site of such a prominent hero fight. Goodbye, sir. She told him, her voice losing its previously held friendliness. Shocked, Izuku immediately tried to protest. Wait. Miss. He was cut off by the click of being hung up on. Izuku redialed the number and got a different operator. But it hadn't gone much better. The man he spoke to had told him there was already people there, which he could see was a lie. Izuku had called 5 more times, but he was given to a supervisor. Sir, if you continue to call like this, we will hand your number over to the police and be pressing charges for harassment and making false claims. The stern woman told him before hanging up on him. Izuku stood there in disbelief as tears of frustration poured from his face, his mind trying to comprehend what was happening both around him and the multiple conversations he just had. Snapping back to reality, a part of Izuku that he hadn't known existed before rose as he put away his phone and he slapped his cheeks. Then he pulled out the whistle his mom had insisted he take when he went to work and blew it as hard as he could. The people that were around paused from their panic to stare at him. Everyone, listen up. We're starting a fire brigade, so line up. He yelled using his teaching voice, getting straight to work organizing them to fight the fire as best they could without proper equipment. Later, when it would all be over, he would look back and chalked it up to the intense situation and their familiarity with him as to why they listened to him of all people. He got them to gather up water from the shorefront as well as digging up exposed dirt and the snow to throw on the fire. He helped the others lead people away from the blaze and somewhere safer. Izuku had just helped an elderly man away from a collapsed building and was about to hand him off to someone else when a young child's scream pierced the air from one of the buildings that were on fire. Izuku's mind went blank, and he wasn't thinking about anything, being only subconsciously aware that he had taken off his coat as he ran into the burning building. He wasn't expecting the blackened void inside the building with only small parts framed by blinding flames, but he pushed on with his coat pressed to his face. He couldn't remember if he called out for the child or not, but he found the kid inside a playpen with another child trying to open it while crying. Izuku didn't hesitate to scoop them both up and covered their mouths with his coat, then quickly retraced his steps to the door. Running back out, he was immediately greeted by other people pulling him away and trying to check on them. His vision was working hard to readjust to the brighter outside world when he heard a loud crash behind him. Turning, he saw the apartment building had collapsed into a fiery heap, which definitely would have killed the three of them if he had hesitated. He didn't get the chance to ponder his near-death experience as a hysterical woman ran over and had taken the sobbing children from him. He took a few seconds to get himself in order before he pushed himself to his feet and left his coat with the family. Izuku took off his jacket and wrapped it around his waist. The sting from the chill did wonders to clear his head, and he clapped his hands. Everyone back to work. We still have 10 buildings to put out. Let's move. He shouted, forcing himself to go on and keep everyone else, himself included, focused on the fire. Izuku's concept of time slipped away as he continued directing the Southsiders to keep the fire from spreading. He had also pulled a total of 5 other people from burning buildings before the earlier predicted snowstorm hit, which helped them finally put out the fire. With the threat of the fire no longer hanging over his head, he let himself take a moment to sit down against a street lamp. He stared at the remains of 2 buildings illuminated by the embers floating in the air. Glancing around, he noticed night had fallen and took out his phone to check the time. He saw it was 22:05. He distantly acknowledged that he spent hours there that had blurred together in his memory and noticed he had a lot of missed calls from his mom and all of the Bakugos. Even Kachan had called him. Still dazed, he called his mom, and once she picked up, she immediately launched into asking, "Izuku, are you all right? Oh, baby, what happened? You should have been home hours ago? And then you weren't answering your PP phone." Upon hearing his mother's voice, the numbness from shock left him and he broke down. He began sobbing and told her everything that had happened in the last 8 hours, ranting about how he hadn't seen one hero, officer, or firefighter the entire time he'd been there. Inko had done her best to calm him down over the phone once he began talking and promised to come to get him as soon as possible. He would have stayed on the phone with her, but his battery was low, so they, unfortunately, had to hang up. As the adrenaline and shock faded, Izuku became aware of how cold it was and how much his body was shaking. He rubbed his arms, trying to ignore the painful sting whenever he touched a burn. He was only mildly surprised he had them, considering he had rushed in and out of burning buildings. Izuku nearly jumped when a thick blanket was wrapped around his shoulders. Turning around, he saw the leader of the Nightcrawlers, a South Side gang. The man sat next to Izuku and leaned against him, giving Izuku some much-needed warmth. There were a few other people around them, and one of them gave Izuku a bottle of water. No one spoke, but with the atmosphere around them, no one had to for him to understand what they were doing. Izuku didn't say anything to them either, finding the silence to be much more fitting as people began pulling charred bodies from buildings. Or what remained of them. The Southsiders took care of him until his mother arrived, being led by one of his students. Their reunion was an affair full of tears as Inko told him how worried she and the Bakugos all were, and apologies for what he had just been through. Once they had gotten themselves partially together, Inko checked him over for injuries and a few others that were there. Before they left, Izuku had his mom write down the names of clinics for the victims to go to, then handed it to the leader, trusting him to spread it around before he left with Inko to a hospital. He had endured the worried ranting from his auntie and gentle scolding from his uncle and mom when he got home that night. Once everything had calmed down and Izuku had some food in him, he passed out in his bed from sheer exhaustion. Izuku had managed to walk away from the incident with only some minor burns from the ash and some smoke inhalation that would sort itself out with some medication and a few days' rest. He had been lucky compared to many others that day, but he didn't learn the full extent of the damage until he called the Miyakis the next day. He had also quickly learned that Endeavor's hero agency wasn't planning on paying a dime for the damages. Someone was even trying to pass it off as a freak coincidence. Izuku had called both the agency and the Hero Safety Commission to complain but was firmly shut down by both for BS reasons. The calls had left Izuku seething in his room absolutely livid. His respect for Auntie Mitsuchan and Kachan had grown tenfold if this was how they felt during their fits and didn't kill anyone. He hadn't known he could feel this angry, but hearing those idiots call the South Side an abandoned den of degenerates full of drug addicts and moronic criminals left him pacing his room trembling with his fury. The nerve of them calling his students such horrible things after having the gall of denying them the money they owed them. Izuku's eyes landed on the Endeavor collectible sitting on a shelf next to Kiku-kun's drawing and had half a mind to throw it out a window. In the midst of his anger, an idea struck him. He rushed over to his computer, and he checked how much money he had in the account he set up for his merchandise sales. Then he did some research into how much money it would take to build an apartment complex, his eyes falling back to his box of collectibles shortly after. Izuku genuinely might not care what happened to him or that people had given him shit all his life for being quirkless, but the people on the South Side had in the short 3 months he's known them become much more than just his students to him, and they had been through quite enough in Izuku's opinion. The residents of the South Side were his people, and if no one was going to take care of his people, then he would just have to take care of them himself. Chapter 12. Sowing Seeds. Uraraka Saori was tidying up around the office. Normally she would be drawing up plans or she would be arranging with their contractors for project materials, but business had been slow, while construction was steady and there would always be work. Their small family-owned company wasn't that appealing compared to the bigger companies in the area. Both she and her husband had been forced to cut back on a lot to save up for Ochako's future schooling. Saori felt a smile creep up on her face as she spotted the picture of their family on Takuma's desk. Becoming a hero would be very tough, but if they had to skip a meal or two, then it would be worth it if their daughter could live her dreams. That being said, she and Takuma had been praying for something to change and for a little help, but as it was, it didn't look like that was going to happen anytime soon. There was a bit of good news, however, as she did have a meeting with a prospective client. It was arranged via email, and while Midoriya-san hadn't given her many details, she couldn't help hoping it wouldn't fall through. She was considering whether she should also sweep up the floor when there was a timid knock at the office door, making her jump. She looked at the clock and saw it was the appointment time and cursed herself for getting wrapped up in her worries and checked if she looked all right, then opened the door. She was about to greet them when she saw who was there and became confused as she stared at a young boy in a suit. He had dark green bushy hair pulled back in a short ponytail and was mostly plain looking other than the freckles and bags under his eyes. The boy couldn't have been any older than Ochako. He nervously shuffled, fiddling with the handle of his briefcase. "Hey, are you Uraraka-san?" the boy asked, glancing at the doorplate. Saori blinked, then nodded. Yes I am." She answered, wondering if the boy was one of Ochako's friends from school. The boy stood there for a minute, then asked, "Are you going to let me in?" "Yes, of course, come in," Saori said, moving out of the way. The boy walked into the office, and she led him over to her desk. The boy sat himself down in the chair across from her. "Please forgive me for asking, but who are you?" Saori questioned as she sat down at her chair. She's certain Ochako would know better than to invite friends over to the office without telling them first, and their prospective client would likely be here any moment. The boy looked confused for a moment, then realization crossed his face and he bowed. "I apologize for not introducing myself, Uraraka-san. My name is Midoriya. I arranged for a meeting with you about perhaps hiring YU for a project." The boy Midoriya-san told her. That certainly surprised her. Saori gave the boy another look over, searching for any signs of the boy being older than he appeared, but came up with nothing. I see. Forgive me for asking, but how old are you, Midoriya-san?" she asked, because there could be one of two things happening right now. On one hand, Midoriya-san might be a boy her daughter's age looking to hire a construction company for some god-forsaken reason, or Midoriya-san might be one of those few people born with a quirk that stopped the aging process. In which case she'd be very embarrassed and owe the man an apology. The boy flinched but answered anyway. "I'll be T13 in July, Uraraka-san." The boy averted his gaze and fiddled with his sleeve while Saori blinked, feeling confused. "Oh, I'm sorry, Midoriya-san, but I'm not sure we can do business with someone so young," she explained, unable to keep from feeling a bit disappointed at the apparent lack of business. The boy didn't look too shocked by her response and instead fished out some papers from his briefcase and placed them on the desk. L. Legally speaking you can. S. So long as T. the person in Q question is quirkless. W. Which I am. Uraraka-san. He said, taking out an ID card and putting it on the papers. Saori stared at the boy in disbelief, then turned to the papers and saw it was a printout of some law in regard to the quirkless that indeed confirmed what Midoriya said, and looking at the boy's license confirmed the boy's age and his status as a quirkless person. She probably ended up staring at the documents for a minute or two too long, but she was honestly in shock. For one, she had never heard of this law, and she did double-check it by looking it up on her phone to confirm the outrageous but quite real law, and secondly, Saori had no idea what to do with this knowledge. You Uraraka-san? Midoriya-san timidly called, getting her attention. She put her phone away and turned back to Midoriya-san. Alright. Well, what project did you want us to do? Saori questioned, nervously shifting in her chair. Should she really be entertaining the boy's request? Whatever it was. Midoriya-san brightened up and he pulled out some more papers from his briefcase. IW wanted to have an apartment complex built, 3 floors and not including basement, with about 15 units. Midoriya-san explained, showing her some rough blueprints he'd made, which was more of a floor plan than anything else. Going over them with the boy, Saori realized this was probably going to be one of the biggest projects they would have done if she accepted the job. The units would be simple, 2 small bedrooms, living room, kitchenette, and a small bathroom, but they would need to be built from the ground up from what Midoriya-san was saying. Just running the basic numbers, Saori knew this was a costly endeavor both for the company and the boy. How long do you think this would take to build? Midoriya-san asked, startling Saori out of her thoughts. If you're talking about when people could move in, perhaps about 6 months if our crew could use their quirks. She answered, and Midoriya-san nodded. That W would be preferable. He muttered. Yes, but Midoriya-san, this will cost quite a lot of money, 693,270,000 yen at least. Saori warned, only to be met by Midoriya-san's green eyes burning with an emotion she couldn't exactly place. I'll pay you half up front as soon as we sign a contract. He told her firmly. Saori balked and stared at the boy, shocked. Was she being punked right now? Or was this boy some kind of millionaire? 346,635,000 yen? Up front. She quickly looked around the office for any sort of camera or possible listening devices, but after a minute concluded that this was indeed a serious offer. She returned her attention to the greenette. I'll have to survey the site to make sure it's zoned for residential before W we could get permits and draw up a contract. So where is this being built, Midoriya-san? Saori inquired, very much questioning whether or not this was really happening. Midoriya-san's confidence left him, and he shrunk into himself, suddenly nervous. Niigata Prefecture, Block 49 of the South Side District. He quietly replied, and Saori's stomach dropped. She knew about the South Side, she knew what doing business in the South Side meant, and Midoriya-san seemed to notice her distress. You Uraraka-san, I can guarantee that there will be no trouble for you or your employees if you take this job, nothing illegal or immoral. I just want your help to replace an apartment complex that burned down recently, honestly. Midoriya-san promised, borderline pleading with her. Saori squirmed in her chair, feeling conflicted as she thought of what to do now. Was she so desperate for money to be so morally bankrupt as to accept a sketchy job in a red light district and take millions from a child no older than her daughter? She bit the tip of her thumb as she ran numbers in her head, the pros and cons of taking the job, the possible risks of working in the South Side, the difference 346,635,000 yen would make for everyone in the company. The thing that probably made up her mind was the resigned look that Midoriya-san made when she didn't say anything. Like he was expecting her to reject the job. Saori gulped and told him, I'd like to examine the area in person and draw up the blueprints, and if we can get the permits to do so, we'll get a contract made up for the work. The boy all but jumped and stared at her, genuinely shocked, then his entire form was trembling from the joy he radiated. Midoriya-san immediately stood up and began bowing to her. Thank you, Uraraka-san. You have no idea what this means to me. He exclaimed, and Saori became very flustered. It's not the big of a deal. She mumbled, but Midoriya-san brushed her off, still very cheerful. When can you come to the site? I'll personally escort you. He offered, and Saori had to dig out her daily planner for a day, unable to remember off the top of her head. Perhaps the day after tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. She suggested, and Midoriya-san nodded, head moving rapidly. That will be perfect. I'll meet you at Sakia Station. He told her, writing down something on one of the papers, then handing it to her. Midoriya-san bowed again. Thank you for working with me, Uraraka-san. Here are my contact details. Please inform me if something comes up before we meet. Good day, Uraraka-san. He said, then left the office with a wave before she could say a word. Saori blinked, then glanced down at the paper, finding a phone number as well as the address of the station with details of how to get there. She sighed, rubbing her forehead, wondering what kind of trouble her spur-of-the-moment choice would no doubt bring. Chapter 13. Beginning to pick up pieces. The limited edition, fully mobile All Might action figure was probably the most monetarily valuable thing Izuku owned. It was one of only 3,000 in the world due to the difficulty of making an action figure with 30 different joints. It was made even rarer due to a communication mistake. 100 of those 3,000 were painted with All Might's first costume. 6-year-old Izuku had promised himself to never let it go when he had somehow won it from a contest. However, in the face of the Southside Inferno, as it had been named, such a thing meant absolutely nothing to him, other than it would pay the lump sum he needed to get a roof over his student's head again. Upon signing the work contract with Uraraka almost 2 weeks after the fire, he couldn't find it in himself to regret it for a second. Words could not describe how thankful he was to Uraraka-san for taking the job. He had been through a lot of companies by the time they first met. It was rather hard to find someone willing to work in the South Side. Or for someone quirkless and 12. Izuku might have had some stern talks with his students, so they knew not to bother any of Uraraka-san's employees. He was surprised by the lack of pushback but chose to accept it, though in the following days Izuku did notice that the Southsiders had been treating him differently. It started when he first returned 3 days after the fire. He was met with many thank yous from just about everyone involved. Izuku had been understandably flustered but did his best to brush it off and got to work putting his first plan into action. Izuku had tracked down the owner of the land by asking his students and bought the property for a steal. Property rates often drop in the face of tragedy, and it wasn't that high in the beginning since the South Side was a red light district. The next was to organize a mass funeral for the victims, which had been a hell of an ordeal, mind you, even with his mom's help. Organizing a funeral for one person was difficult, but for 68? Near unthinkable. But 68 people had died that night or in the days following, and Izuku was determined to give them all their last rites. First, he tried to get as many of their names as he could and track down family and friends for them. He was sadly disappointed by finding few who cared, or in some cases not having any people left to care. The second was to find a crematorium able to handle 68 corpses at once. The fees would be large, but he still had some money left over from selling the action figure to cover the funds without dipping into the money for Uraraka-san. The third and most daunting task seemed to be finding a priest to bless the bodies and oversee the whole thing. After trying 2 temples, he went to a monastery, and one of the elder monks thought it would be a good teaching experience for the younger disciples. When the funeral service actually began a week after he bought the land, it was surreal. Izuku had been to a funeral once before for his grandmother, but this had been, expectantly, on a whole different scale. Due to the circumstances, the beginning of the funeral was held on the grounds of the old apartment complex after the rubble had been cleared away. More people came than he expected, but he welcomed them since most had helped him with the physical preparations. The service itself took a long time as the last rites were performed for all 68 people, and for 37 of them he was the only person to take care of the physical portions. It was a very real struggle not to break out crying when he picked out the bones from the ashes to offer to one of the young disciples. Night had long since fallen when they finished placing the last urn onto the altar. Izuku had spent the previous day setting it up with the help of his students. Once everything was all over, Izuku, the elder monk, and the 3 young disciples he brought with him were putting out the candles they'd lit earlier so everyone could see. Putting out the last candle, he turned to the 4 and bowed to his feet. Thank you for helping me with the service today. Izuku said. His voice had gone hoarse from praying for so many people. The man hummed back. I don't think I've ever held such a ceremony before. The man mused, his voice in a similar state, but I believe the experience shall be enlightening. He added, then bowed to Izuku in turn. I'll pray we won't have to repeat it. Izuku told him and the man nodded sagely. The five of them left in silence, making their way to their respective homes. Since the day of the funeral, the people in the South Side, regardless of ailment or faction, apparently held a great amount of respect for him now. He couldn't count how many of the families came up to him to thank him for allowing them to give their loved ones something like a proper funeral. The people seemed to welcome the idea of Izuku building a new complex and followed through on not bothering Uraraka's employees. They were also thankful to Izuku for letting the people left homeless from the fire stay in the community center and giving them food. There were a lot of events that happened in the following week where their respect for him was clear, especially when he was teaching his students full-time again. Weary of this sudden change, Izuku got together his nerve to ask someone about their change in attitude towards him. The gang he confronted laughed at him before one gave him an answer. Kid, do you really think you're the first goody-goody that's come here to strut his stuff? A sleazy brunette asked, moving to lean on Izuku's shoulder, and no. Izuku replied, only slightly uncomfortable with how close he had gotten. Yeah, no shit, he spat, taking a long drag from his cigarette. We get all kinds of upstanding citizens come rocking up and sticking their stuck-up noses in our business. Religious nuts are the worst of them fuckers. The man explained, unintentionally blowing some smoke in Izuku's face. His nose scrunched up at the smell, but he said nothing. The man grinned, showing off a row of sharp teeth. Know the big difference between those dickheads and your punk ass? The man quizzed, and Izuku shook his head. They're shallow, selfish pricks, the whole lot of them. He told him, rolling his eyes. Izuku blinked, turning to the other three gang members for some clarification. A man that looked like a goblin, Kenji, Izuku remembered, spoke up. Most of those folks just come here to make themselves feel good or for the karma. Izuku frowned at that. They come down to help the less fortunate, and to save our souls. Stay for about a week max before going back to their lives with that heartwarming feeling of doing something good. Then there's some of them that will brag about how good of a person they were for handing out a couple of sandwiches. Kenji elaborated. The brunette scoffed, waving his clawed hand. They can't stick around in our little hellhole for more than some kind of fucked up day trip. He joked, taking another cigarette out since he'd finished the first. Regardless of who they were, missionaries, goodwill, social workers, would go on preaching about how much they cared about helping us become better, but as soon as shit got real, they took their bullshit and fucked off back to where they came from. He informed. Izuku proceeded to scowl at that and hated that he could believe them and that it was so believable after what happened with the aftermath of the fire. He flinched when the brunette poked his chest with a claw, then said, you on the other hand. Not only have you stuck around for way longer than those pricks, but when everything went to crap like it always does here, you didn't just stick around, you fucking did something about it. The brunette moved so that he could look Izuku in the eye. Look, we aren't the sharpest tools in the shed. Fuck Kenji over there couldn't spell his own damn name before you came along, he commented, jabbing a thumb towards the goblin man. Kenji humbly nodded, not denying the claim. But we know a good thing when we see it, and anyone with a working brain cell knows you don't bite the hand that feeds you. He told Izuku. Izuku could partially understand what the man was saying but still found it hard to grasp it as a whole. Were they really just listening to him for being a decent person? The brunette, upon seeing Izuku's doubt, dropped the pretense. It's not that complicated, kid. Think about it like that symbiotic relationship crap you went on about on Wednesday. He brought up, and Izuku probably shouldn't be so happy they were taking his teaching seriously enough to apply it to real-life situations. You take care of us and respect that we have adult lives and problems that can't always be solved legally. We respect you for not being a bitch about everything we do behind your back, and if you want us to do something that isn't batshit crazy, we'll do it. Simple as that. He illustrated for him. Izuku immediately became flustered but honored by the brunette's statement. The fact anyone outside of his family respected him so much to just listen to him because they trusted him was just a bit too much for him to handle, so he made his excuses and went home that day feeling a bit lighter. Chapter 14. An encounter with a wild sea panda. A week after the enlightening conversation, Izuku felt the Southside Inferno was weighing a bit too heavily on the children it affected. Izuku took some time to think about what he could do that he wasn't already doing when he got a brilliant idea. Izuku did some research, then he took some money and approached the families with his idea for their permission. He also carefully asked around to his older students if they wanted to help, so once he got everything set up and arrangements made, he surprised the children that Saturday. He was giddy as he went about his work that day, but the younger children had picked up on his excitement and they were already curious about him showing up early. Just as he finished up the lesson on the fascinating way food webs worked, and he was grinning as he said, "And I know that this can be difficult to understand, so to help you grasp the subject properly we'll be taking a field trip to the Niigata City Aquarium." As expected, the kids collectively lost it, asking their parents or siblings if they were really going or for permission. Others attached themselves to Izuku, asking him if he was actually going to be taking them or thanking him. Izuku would have answered their questions, but Kiku-kun was one of the latter and he had his mother's quirk. When he could move again, Izuku helped the 5 older students get the 15 kids ready to go. It wasn't as hard as Izuku expected it to be when he had the families help to get them all dressed for the snow. Given the size of their group, Izuku decided it would be easier to just rent 3 large SUVs to take them and made sure the students driving had legal licenses to drive. The excited chatting from the kids made it hard not to smile the entire drive, not that it was very long. Once they were standing outside the building, Izuku got the kids' attention and reminded them of the rules. "Okay, remember we are guests here and that means we have to follow their rules. So even though the animals are really exciting, you shouldn't disturb them by knocking on the glass or yelling at them to get their attention." He instructed, getting excited nods back with a few okays and yes, Deku Sensei. "S. And when we have questions, you are to ask a worker as politely as possible. Now we're about to go in. Does everyone have their buddies? And know who their group leaders are?" he asked. The kids happily divided themselves into groups of 5 and with 2 supervising adults. Izuku clapped. "Very good. Now if everyone stays on their best behavior, we'll get souvenirs for everyone back home, okay?" he told them, getting a row of cheers making him chuckle. Izuku turned to Masao-san, his group partner, and nodded, then led them all to the entrance. Getting their tickets was a bit of a challenge. He counted their group again. He had to get 6 adult tickets, 12 years old and up, and kid tickets for everyone else. Thank God the cashier took cards because no one would have had the cash needed on hand, and got tour wristbands for the group. He and Misao's group led the way to where they were supposed to meet up with their tour guide. Izuku was a bit anxious about this part as he had no idea how the kids would react to his second surprise. Kaori was happily pointing out the fish on the hallway walls, only to stop and gasp loudly once she saw Gang Orca. The rest of the kids had heard her and stopped what they were doing only to also freeze upon seeing the hero. The hero had flinched at the gasp and seemed to be waiting for some kind of reaction, and Izuku wasn't sure he looked much better. Gang Orca was a 50-50 bet on whether the kids would be thrilled by him or afraid, not because of the man's appearance. Most of them had neighbors that would be right at home in R-rated horror films. But Izuku knew that the Southsiders hadn't had the best experience with professional heroes in general, and the SSI was still rather recent. As he waited for the fallout of seeing the hero, he was a bit surprised when Kaori-chan tugged on his pant leg and tried to whisper, "P.S.'s, Midoriya-chan. Midoriya-chan, look. It's a hero." Izuku blinked and nearly laughed when he realized she was trying to alert him of the nearby hero. "I know Kaori-chan. That's Gang Orca. He's going to give us a tour of the aquarium," he gently explained to the group, causing a few shocked gasps. Then Kaori and the rest of the children proceeded to mob the semi-aquatic man, happily lobing all sorts of questions at him. The shocked look on the hero was quite comical, and 2 of his older students were all too happy to laugh at the man's distress. Izuku, though happy they weren't scared, he became rather flustered when he realized the questions they were asking were related to his theories on his quirk, and that was just embarrassing. He quickly went over to the children to calm them down and subsequently rescue the hero. Today wasn't quite going as Kugo expected it to. He has given quite a few aquarium tours since he rose to the top 100 pro heroes in Japan, and despite the years it usually went the same, with the majority of kids being afraid of him for the entire tour. The kids who weren't were far and few in between, even if they also had mutation quirks. He expected this group to be about the same when all of the kids stopped and stared at him as if he grew another head. The girl recognizing him was a surprise, but judging from her words the boy had likely spoken of Kugo to some of them. That being said, he didn't expect all 15 of the children to effectively mob him to ask him questions about his quirk. The greenette had quickly taken to calming them and softly scolded them for asking personal questions unprompted. Being courteous, he answered some of the milder ones, like if he had whiskers like a cat when he was younger. Short answer: yes, he did. The tour itself went mostly alright, and the kids all seemed to really enjoy what he was telling them. Their chaperones weren't the normally expected teachers either, but it was hard to judge what normal looked like in the world of quirks. The greenette, Midoriya, if he heard the little girl correctly, would make various comments in addition to what he said or point something out occasionally, and the rest of the group, adults too, would stop to listen and always took the boy very seriously. It was an odd dynamic, but he didn't see the need to speak of it at the moment, given the boy was accurate in what he did speak of. Nearing the end of the 3-hour tour, he had taken a moment to rest as the group sat marveling at the large coral reef tank in the next room, with only one of the 21 staying behind with him. Kugo took that moment to take a drink from his bottle. The one who stayed behind had turned to him. He could look Kugo in the eye given his height and had an obvious reptile mutation. "I apologize if Kaori insulted you by calling you a sea panda earlier. My sister can be a bit over-enthusiastic," he said with a heavy lisp. Glancing at the girl in question, Kugo didn't see many features the two shared, but that might change as the other grew. He simply waved the boy's comment off. "It's fine. I certainly wasn't expecting it though," he responded with a soft chuckle. Midoriya-san said orcas are like pandas, said he got that idea from his aunt. His reptilian companion supplied. Kugo hummed back, which certainly explained why the boy became flustered every time one of the kids called him that. He was also certain that Tsunagu would get a kick out of the comparison, and he was giving some serious consideration to changing his name to it on the Hero Network for the novelty of it. "Is it nice?" the other asked him suddenly. Kugo turned to the man, his face twisted in confusion. "Giving tours for children," he clarified after a second. Yes, I do enjoy helping kids learn more about the world, but I'm afraid most find my appearance to be unnerving," Kugo confessed, and the man nodded, eyeing the small family of 3 swiftly moving through the room while giving the 2 a wide berth. "Though getting more well known as a hero has helped, your group has definitely been the most receptive to my presence, I must admit," he mused, and the man gave him a look. "They don't like you because you're a hero," the man told him flatly, and Kugo was admittedly confused once he heard that. "They like you because Midoriya-san talks about you," the man corrected, and Kugo found himself more baffled by that. Did the little greenette's opinion mean that much to them? Kugo's eyes trailed over to the group, finding most of them still listening to Midoriya as he explained something. "Midoriya-san is very important to us, and they know Midoriya-san knows a lot about heroes, so if Midoriya-san says you're a good hero, they'll trust him, even if they don't like heroes," the man said, his slit-shaped pupils also on the group. "Not like heroes?" Kugo questioned. The very idea of it was foreign to him. The thought of any child in this day and age disliking heroes was utterly odd to him. The man returned his gaze to Kugo. "We've not had much positive interaction with heroes. Before today, the closest they've been to a hero is when Endeavor burned down their homes," the man explained, contempt flashing briefly across his features once he mentioned the number 2 hero. No more needed to be said for Kugo to understand, and he scowled. Right," he muttered, finishing his drink. It was hard to forget the number 2 hero, but Kugo had perhaps had the luck of never meeting the victims of Endeavor's aftermath before now. He wasn't so ignorant as to believe Endeavor has never harmed civilians with his quirk, or that other, lesser-known heroes with a similar mindset and actions don't exist, but he couldn't remember the last time he had distinctly met anyone harmed by a hero outside of the few times he crossed paths with them on the battlefield. "That's why Midoriya-san wanted them to meet you, so they wouldn't be afraid of heroes," the man commented. "Said you'd be best because you like kids and don't look like the typical hero. Looking more like a villain probably makes them like you more honestly," he told Kugo before the man joined the group in the other room. Kugo found himself stunned as he watched the man walk away. He had been purposely chosen to help children not be afraid of heroes? And he had been picked because he looked more like a villain? This was truly far from what he was expecting to happen today when he woke up this morning, and he wondered what Tsunagu would think of the experience. Chapter 15. Expanding Social Circles. After the day at the aquarium, spirits had been raised a bit at the community center, and while Izuku was happy and proud of himself for what he had done for them, he couldn't help feeling like he could be doing more for them. The apartment building was a step in the right direction, but he wanted to do more, so as Izuku was prone to do, he doubled down on his efforts. So, for the next 5 months and 2 weeks were spent pushing himself to find the best deals to get the most of his money when buying supplies, speeding through his studies to get his degree as soon as possible without skipping important information binging, and after his tutoring, Izuku would do what he could to help Uraraka's employees so their work went on smoothly. Some days he'd go to the shrine to do upkeep and would sometimes find himself talking to the ones without family. Other times he'd be helping to patch up people using his and his mom's medical knowledge, and occasionally when his mom and the Bakugos teamed up they made him take a break from his insane schedule. There were other events since then, a few firefights between gangs or other factions, bad weather messing with everyone's plans, villains or heroes wreaking havoc the few times they crossed paths into the south side, and even the odd natural but a completely innocent accident. By May, Izuku began questioning whether or not he was even still disappointed by the lack of heroes in the south side. The few that did never made Izuku's life any easier or seemed to help anyone living there. Nothing as bad as the SSI, but Izuku still didn't like that it happened. Izuku was nearly in tears when mid-July came and he could do his first walkthrough of the building with Uraraka-san to make sure everything was ready to move into. He also spent an embarrassingly long time thanking her for her help as he gave her the last payment. Yua stood nervously outside of the recently made apartment complex holding the napkin with the details from the guy she spoke to last night in one of her 3 sets of hands. He had promised Yua that it would be a good opportunity for her and that she'd be perfect for it, but now that she stood outside of the building, doubt filled her. One of her hands went up to mess with the bun she put her hair up in as she tried not to feel as out of place in front of this lovely-looking building that stood out starkly against the burned ground around it. She pulled open the front door and found herself in a lobby with a young boy in a suit that looked about her son's age. He was muttering and going through papers before he looked up at her. She expected him to flinch away from her, but he just blinked and checked his watch. "You must be Shoji Yua, yes? I'm sorry for not meeting you at the door. Please forgive me, come sit down Shoji-san." He requested, giving her a short polite bow before motioning to the chair on the other side of the front desk. Yua hesitated for a second before deciding against questioning the boy's status and sat down after taking a moment to adjust her arms so the back of the chair wouldn't be too uncomfortable against the joints there. The boy watched her for a second, her arms specifically, before he sat across from her. "Thank you for coming Shoji-san. You're here for the landlord position, yes?" The boy asked, going through the papers again. "Yes." She confirmed, trying to keep her voice clear without opening her mouth too wide. She really needed a job and the last thing she needed was to lose it by scaring the boy. The greenette nodded to himself. "All right, well, I just need to ask you some questions. I apologize if any of these are sensitive, but all personal information will be kept private, okay?" He informed her as he grabbed a pen. Yua felt a bit more anxious shifting in her seat, and while she was uncomfortable, she didn't have much choice. The boy looked back to the papers he had. "Your full name is Shoji Yua?" "No middle name, and Shoji is your maiden name, correct?" he asked, and she nodded. The boy wrote that down presumably. He asked for more general information like that for a bit. Age, 30, height, 175 centimeters, etc. Before asking, "What is your quirk, and does it give you any abilities that aren't obvious when not in use?" Yua ducked her head. "Arachnid body. I have multiple limbs and share many physical features and traits with spiders, and my hair is made of webbing. I don't have any other abilities though," she admitted, rubbing one of her arms. The boy's mouth opened, then he shook his head and moved on to the work-related questions after he wrote that down. "Do you have experience in this field or something similar?" he questioned. "I worked for a hotel for 5 years in housekeeping," she said, unsure if that counted. "I assume you've worked there long enough to have a general idea of what your duties will be." Interviewing future staff and tenants, keeping records of who's living where and who works for us, paperwork and tax documents, and handling any maintenance requests either by calling a professional or doing so yourself if possible. Can you do these things? He listed off. Yes, I should be able to do that. Yua told him and the boy nodded, writing again. You are aware this is a live-in position. Would there be any reason this would be a problem for you? The boy inquired. Yua hadn't known that. Maybe, my son is living with me. She confessed and the boy hummed. How old is he? He asked and Yua's eyes dropped to her lap. He turned 13 in February. She timidly answered. The boy paused but moved on fairly quickly. Does he have any mental or physical conditions that would make living in an apartment complex a problem either for him or others? He questioned and she looked up. No, none that I'm aware of. Yua responded and the boy nodded. Then there should be no problem with your son. He informed her, though he did look sheepish once he looked back down on the papers. This question might come off as offensive and I don't mean it to be, but I must ask, if you can write and read Japanese? The boy asked and that kind of took Yua off guard. Yes? She answered, unsure whether she should be offended or not. The boy sighed, relieved. Good, good. Well, as you may know, this is a red light district and that comes with certain unavoidable problems, turf wars, firefights, and various dangerous elements. Will you be able to deal with that daily? The greenette questioned. Considering she had been living in red light districts since her parents had kicked her out, she could more than handle it and nodded. The boy shuffled the papers. Great. One last question. Do you have a criminal record or have you been arrested? He asked innocently and Yua felt her heart drop. Why yes, I do. She meekly confessed. Could you please explain the nature of what you were arrested for, Shoji-san? He probed and Yua bashfully admitted. I stole some baby food, about 10 years ago. The boy gave her an understanding hum and nodded, marking it down, then turned to her. All right, when can you start? He asked, making Yua stare at him, taken aback. Perhaps Friday at the earliest. She answered, uncertain if the interview was continuing or not. That will be perfect. You can move in as soon as possible. I'll show you your unit once we sign your contract. Your starting pay will be 2,310 yen per hour for the first 2 months as a trial period, and then I'll bump you up to 2,890 yen when that's over. The boy explained, putting the papers aside and went through a drawer as Yua sat in shock. Was she hired? Was that really that easy? No background checks? Or waiting for a callback after interviewing others? The boy pulled out a stack of papers and handed them to Yua along with a pen. She stared at the contract, perhaps a bit numb as she struggled to understand what was going on. It couldn't be this easy, right? But as the boy walked her through the things that needed to be signed and how to insert in places, it just kind of sunk in. After they were done, the greenette led her to a ground unit that was much nicer than where she was living with her son now, and over there is the bathroom. It's a bit small, so it's just got a shower unit instead of bath shower unit. He rambled off, pointing to a door. It's fine, thank you. Yua said, trailing off since she hadn't caught the boy's name. The greenette stared up at her, slightly confused, before his face turned completely red and he bowed. I'm so sorry. Forgive me for not introducing myself earlier, Shoji-san. I'm Midoriya Izuku. I'll be your boss. He told her, rather flustered. Yua stared at the boy, shocked perhaps for the 4th time in 2 hours. You're my boss? Yua questioned and she looked the boy over. Had she missed some clue of the boy being older than he appeared because of her nerves? He did have some bags under his eyes and looked tired, but not much older than a preteen. Midoriya-san rubbed his neck and nervously chuckled. Well, since I'm the one who owns the building and I'll be signing your checks. He mumbled, and Yua nodded. Yua might not understand how things were going her way for once in her life, but if this boy was going to offer her just about everything she could want, then she wasn't going to question it. So long as she had a roof over Mezzo's head and she could put food on the table, she'd take it.